All right, so welcome. We're going to be diving into a case from Bermuda, using excerpts from the actual court judgment. So this has been the deep dive.
It has.
Thanks for listening.
And thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time.
In this podcast, there could be mistakes, so please check the source material. Enjoy exploring and have a great day.
The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not intended as legal advice and should not be relied upon as such. While efforts are made to ensure accuracy, the information discussed may not reflect the most current legal developments and is subject to change. For advice on specific legal issues, consult a qualified attorney licensed in your jurisdiction. The opinions expressed are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of any organizations they are affiliated with. By watching this video, you acknowledge and agree to this disclaimer.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Today we're taking a deep dive into, a place you might not expect when you think about data privacy. We're heading to Bermuda.
Bermuda. Yeah, it's funny. People think of beaches and vacation, but it's also a massive hub for global finance and insurance.
Right, and those industries, they're dealing with tons of personal information all the time, so I guess data protection has to be a top priority.
Exactly. And Bermuda's Personal Information Protection Act from 2016, it shows how seriously they take this stuff. They're not just playing catch-up.
Okay, so what makes Bermuda's approach so different? I mean, every country has data protection laws, right?
True, but Bermuda's Act, it takes a proactive approach. They're not just reacting to breaches, they're trying to get ahead of the game. Like, they're thinking about the future of data privacy.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How are they doing that? Do they have a crystal ball or something?
No, not quite. The Act creates this privacy commissioner position, and they're given some pretty unique powers. For example, they can actually commission research into how personal information is being used and what the impact might be.
So they're not just sitting around waiting for problems to happen. They're trying to anticipate them.
Exactly. And this privacy commissioner, they're not just a figurehead. They'd have some serious authority. The Act gives them the power to investigate potential breaches, issue orders to organizations. They can even go as far as entering premises with a warrant if needed.
Wow. Okay. Hold on a second. That sounds like a lot of power for one person.
Yeah.
I mean, who appoints this commissioner? What's stopping them from becoming like a data privacy dictator?
That's a fair point. There are checks and balances in place, don't worry. The governor appoints the commissioner, but only after talking with both the premier and the opposition leader. So it's not a unilateral decision,
Okay, so it's not just one person calling all the shots. That makes sense. But what if an organization disagrees with the commissioner? Like, what if they think a decision was unfair? What can they do?
They actually have the right to judicial review. So if an organization feels they've been wronged, they can appeal the decision in court.
Okay, so there's accountability built in. That's good to know. But what about international companies? Data crosses borders all the time these days.
That's another area where Bermuda's Act gets really interesting. It actually tackles the challenges of data transfers in a globalized world. For example, the commissioner can approve these things called binding corporate rules for organizations that are transferring personal information overseas.
Binding corporate rules. You're going to have to break that down for me. What are those?
Sure. Basically, they're internal company policies that are designed to guarantee a certain level of data protection, no matter where the information is being sent. These rules, they have to be approved by the commissioner, and they're legally binding. So it gives reassurance that the data will be handled responsibly, even if it leaves Bermuda.
So it's like a stamp of approval for international data sharing.
Yeah, you could say that. It's definitely a big deal in today's world.
For sure. And is that all they're doing? Or is there more?
Oh, there's more. The commissioner can also set up independent certification mechanisms for data protection.
Okay, more acronyms. Can you translate that into plain English?
Think of it like a seal of approval for companies that meet really high data protection standards. It's a pretty innovative approach. It goes beyond traditional enforcement. Instead of just punishing companies after they mess up, they're trying to encourage good behavior from the start.
Interesting. So it's not all just about sticks. There are carrots, too.
Exactly. And this brings us to another key part of the Act, its focus on collaboration. The Act lets the minister develop something called codes of practice. But it's not just the minister making decisions. They have to consult with the commissioner and relevant stakeholders to come up with these codes.
Wait, back up a sec. What exactly are codes of practice, and why are they so important?
Yeah. Well, think of them as guidelines that spell out how the Act is supposed to work in specific sectors or specific situations. The key here is that they're not just top-down rules. It involves the government, industry experts, and even potentially individuals.
Okay, so it's not just bureaucrats making rules in a vacuum. They're actually getting input from the people who are dealing with data every day.
That's the idea. It helps ensure that the codes are practical, relevant, and reflect everyone's needs.
All right, so we've talked a lot about the Privacy Commissioner and how the Act works in general. But what does this all actually mean for us as individuals? What are our rights when it comes to our data?
No, that's the million-dollar question, and that's where we'll pick things up in part 2 of this deep dive. So, we left off talking about how this act affects us on a personal level, and, well, it gives you some pretty strong rights when it comes to your own data.
Okay, yeah, I'm curious to hear more about that. What kind of rights are we talking about?
First off, you have the right to access your personal information. That's any personal information that's held by an organization.
So like if a company has data about me, I can just ask them what it is.
Exactly. You can request access to it. And they are legally obligated to give it to you within a reasonable time frame.
Wow, okay, that's good to know. But what if the information they have is wrong? Like what if my address is outdated or something?
That's covered too. You have the right to request a correction for any inaccurate information that an organization holds about you.
So if they got my age wrong or something, I can tell them to fix it.
Yep, that's your right. Now, let's say a company is doing something shady with your data, like they're selling it without your permission or something.
Yeah, that's what I'm worried about. What can I do in that situation?
You have the right to complain to the Privacy Commissioner. Remember all those powers we talked about? The commissioner can investigate and take action if needed.
Okay, so there is a process for dealing with that kind of thing. But what does it look like? Do I have to, hire a lawyer and go to court?
Not necessarily. The Act sets out a multi-tiered dispute resolution process. First, you try to resolve the issue informally with the organization directly.
So try to work things out before going nuclear. Makes sense.
Right. And if that doesn't work, the next step would be mediation. A neutral third party comes in and tries to help everyone reach a solution.
Okay, so it's all about trying to find a peaceful resolution first. But what happens if none of that works?
If the informal route and mediation fail, then you could potentially have a formal inquiry by the Privacy Commissioner.
So they really do try to exhaust all other options before going that far.
Exactly. The system is designed to be efficient and fair. On top of individual rights, the Act also looks at data protection in more complex situations.
Like what?
Well, think about mergers and acquisitions. When companies merge or get bought out, there's a ton of personal information that can change hands.
Right, it's like a data hurricane.
Pretty much. But the Act has specific provisions that address data protection during these kinds of transactions.
So my data is still protected even if the company goes through a big shakeup.
Exactly. It's like a safety net for your information. It really shows that they've considered all the different scenarios where our data might be at risk.
It's funny, we started talking about Bermuda, this island paradise. Most people wouldn't think of them as being leaders in data protection, but it seems like they're pretty ahead of the curve.
I agree. It just goes to show that data privacy matters everywhere. It's not just a concern for big tech hubs. Every country, every organization needs to be thinking about these issues.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, what are other countries doing? How does Bermuda's approach compare to the rest of the world?
That's a great question, and that is exactly what we'll be exploring in the final part of this deep dive.
So we've seen how Bermuda is tackling this whole data privacy thing. But how does it stack up against other countries? Is this like a unique approach, or are other places doing similar things?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's definitely not just Bermuda. There's a global trend toward stronger data protection. Bermuda's kind of riding that wave.
Okay, so what are some examples of that trend?
Well, the big one is the European Union's GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. It went into effect back in 2018, and it's really changed the game for data privacy, not just in Europe, but around the world.
Right, GDPR, I've heard about that. It's pretty strict, right?
Oh, yeah, it's serious stuff. It gives individuals a ton of control over their data and sets high standards for companies that handle that data. It's been super influential. We're seeing similar regulations popping up all over.
Like where?
Well, California, for instance, they've got the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, which started in 2020. It's not quite as comprehensive as GDPR, but it's still a major step for data protection in the U.S.
So this is happening in both developed and developing countries.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's cool about Bermuda is that it shows even small countries can be leaders in data protection. They don't have to wait for the big guys to act.
It's like they're punching above their weight in the data privacy world.
Totally. It's pretty inspiring. It shows that any country, big or small, can put their citizens' data rights first.
All right, so zooming out a little, what's the big takeaway here? What does this all mean for the future of data privacy?
I think it shows that people are realizing just how important data protection is in this digital age. We're creating huge amounts of data all the time, and it's crucial that we have strong rules to protect it.
So it's not just about keeping our credit card numbers safe. It's something bigger than that.
Exactly. It's about protecting our basic rights as people. It's about control over our information.
That makes sense. It's actually empowering to think that we have a voice in this.
It is. And the more we know about data privacy, the better we can stand up for our rights and hold companies accountable for what they do with our data.
That's a fantastic point to wrap up on. So to sum things up, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this deep dive?
I'd say remember this. Data privacy is important. Really important. It's not just some technical issue. It's about human rights. Stay informed, know your rights, and don't be afraid to speak up.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of data privacy. And until next time, stay curious.
In this podcast, there could be mistakes, so please check the source material. Enjoy exploring and have a great day.